5 people knew about the Blackwood file before it was sealed. 3 of them refused to speak about it. One of them died in 2001 under circumstances his family still disputes. The 5th, the only one who ever agreed to be recorded, said this in a low voice during a meeting that was never supposed to happen. Whatever Thomas found up there in those hills, it was not new. It had been there a long time, and the people of Blackwood had made their peace with it. The problem was that Thomas did not know the terms of that peace, and neither did the boy. He would not say anything else. He asked that his name never be written down. Welcome back to the archives. Tonight we open the file on Blackwood Township, a community that does not appear on any West Virginia state map printed after 1990, a place where the ash never fully cooled, and a recording that 2 federal agents refused to finish listening to. The file begins as most terrible things do, not with a scream, but with a letter. The letter arrived at the Department of Appalachian Studies at Marshall University on September 4, 1989. It was addressed specifically to Dr. Thomas Hargrove, though by that point Thomas had not held the title of doctor for nearly 14 months. He had been quietly removed from his position in the summer of 1988 following what the department chair described in writing as a pattern of increasingly unsubstantiated claims regarding isolated community behavior in the southern Highland counties. What Thomas had actually been doing was documenting something that made his colleagues deeply uncomfortable. He had spent 3 years visiting small, cut-off communities in the Appalachian Highlands, towns so remote that federal census workers had simply stopped trying. And he had been recording what he found there, not poverty, not ignorance, something else, a pattern. In each community, regardless of religious denomination or ethnic background, Thomas had found the same cluster of behaviors. No artificial light after sundown. Thresholds marked with gray powder, ash he eventually confirmed taken from wood-burning hearths. A collective, unspoken agreement never to speak the names of the dead aloud, and a pervasive, bone-deep fear of the forest line after dark that no one would explain directly but that shaped every aspect of daily life. Thomas believed these behaviors were not superstition. He believed they were memory, generational memory of something real. His colleagues believed he had lost his professional footing and perhaps his mind. The letter that arrived in September of 1989 was written on plain paper in an unsteady hand. It contained no return address. The postmark read Keller, West Virginia, a postal depot that served several communities in the Highland counties, Blackwood among them. The letter said the following, and these are the exact words as transcribed from the original document held in the evidence log. Mr. Hargrove, you were right about what you wrote. There is something in these hills that the old families have known about for a very long time. I cannot say more in a letter. If you want to know what Reverend Voss actually put in that covenant, you need to come here before the cold sets in. Come alone. Ask for the Calloway house. Tell them Clara sent you. After that, do not ask Clara anything else. She will not answer. The letter was signed with a single initial. The initial was E. Thomas drove to Blackwood Township on September 9, 1989. He brought a microcassette recorder, 2 spare tapes, a field notebook, and a 35mm camera. He told no one where he was going. This was, investigators would later note, consistent with his established pattern of solitary field work. It was also, they noted, the last independently verified decision Thomas Hargrove made as a free man. Blackwood Township sat at the end of a gravel road that branched off a state route so minor it had a number but no name. The road climbed for approximately 4 miles through dense second-growth forest, beech and poplar and black walnut, their canopies so thick that even in early September the road ran in perpetual gray-green shadow. Thomas recorded his arrival on the microcassette. His voice on that first tape is measured and academic, the voice of a man who still believed he was in control of the situation. He said September 9th, approximately 3:45 in the afternoon. The access road is unpaved and shows signs of deliberate non-maintenance. No road signs after the state route turnoff. The tree cover is unusually dense for this elevation, noting an absence of bird sound for the last half mile or so, probably nothing. The township itself was small, 14 structures by Thomas's count, 7 of them residences, the others a combination of outbuildings, a feed store that appeared to have been closed for some years, and a low-roofed building with no windows that Thomas could not immediately identify. The buildings were wood-framed, their paint long surrendered to the climate, their porches sagging in the particular way of structures that have been maintained just enough to remain standing, but no more than that. What Thomas noticed first and recorded immediately was the ash, every threshold, every door, every window frame at ground level. A line of fine gray ash, perhaps 2 inches wide, laid down with enough care that it had not scattered despite what must have been days of foot traffic across it. Not salt. Thomas had seen salt used in highland communities before. This was ash. He could smell it when he crouched close, the cold, dead smell of wood long burned, with something underneath it he could not identify, something faintly organic, faintly sweet. He wrote in his notebook, ash lines on all visible thresholds, consistent with what I documented in the Harlan County settlements, but denser application here, more deliberate. Someone refreshes these regularly. Question from what source will ask. He did not ask. Not that day. The residents of Blackwood were not hostile. This is a detail worth holding onto, because it distinguishes Blackwood from the kind of story where the outsider is chased away with shotguns and threats. The people Thomas encountered were polite. They answered his questions in the minimal, courteous way of people who have learned that the fastest way to end a conversation is to appear cooperative. They offered him water. One woman, older, with the particular stillness of someone who has not been surprised by anything in a very long time, offered him a room for the night in exchange for help splitting firewood the following morning. Her name was Ruth Calloway. Thomas accepted. He recorded his first night in the Calloway house, with no unusual observations. The family ate supper before full dark. The meal was cleared, and the dishes washed before the last light left the sky. And then, and Thomas noted this with the careful neutrality of a man trying very hard not to read too much into things, every light in the house was extinguished. The generator in the outbuilding was shut off. Gerald Calloway moved through the house, checking window latches, with the quiet efficiency of a man performing a ritual he has performed 10,000 times. Ruth Calloway laid a fresh line of ash across the kitchen threshold from a clay pot she kept on the highest shelf of the pantry. Thomas lay in the dark in the small upstairs room they had given him, and listened to the forest. He recorded 9:47 post-meridian. Total darkness. No artificial light anywhere in the township. I can see from the window that the other houses are also dark. Complete silence from the family below. The forest is a pause. 12 seconds of silence on the tape. Then the forest is very loud tonight. Thomas stayed in Blackwood for 11 days. On the 3rd day he met Billy Calloway, who was 15 years old and constitutionally incapable of the careful silence his parents had mastered. Billy was curious. Billy had questions of his own. He had found in the crawl space beneath the feed store a water-damaged box of papers that had been there so long they had begun to fuse at the edges, and he had been reading them in secret for 2 years, understanding perhaps a third of what they said. The papers were the personal records of Reverend Elias Voss. Elias Voss had arrived in the Appalachian highlands in 1881, leading a congregation of 37 men, women, and children who had followed him out of a collapsing church community in eastern Pennsylvania. Voss had been formally censured by his denomination. The specific charge was propagation of covenantal doctrines inconsistent with Scripture, which, translated from the ecclesiastical language of the period, meant that Voss had begun teaching his congregation that God was not the only entity with whom a community could enter into a binding agreement. He had found in the highlands a place where the old agreements were still remembered. Thomas read Billy's papers with the controlled urgency of a man who has spent years looking for exactly this and cannot quite believe he is holding it. He transcribed what he could into his notebook. The handwriting was dense and slanted, and frequently crossed out and rewritten, the habit of a man who chose his words with the understanding that words in the right context had weight. The relevant passages as Thomas transcribed them read as follows: "The things that dwell in the wood above the eastern ridge are not demons in the Christian sense, and to call them such is to misunderstand them entirely. They are old. They were here before the Cherokee, and before whatever came before the Cherokee. They do not want worship. They do not want blood. What they want, as near as I have been able to determine through 2 years of careful observation, is acknowledgement. They want to be known. They want the boundary respected, and in exchange for the ash lines and the silence and the careful maintenance of the threshold, they leave the houses alone." And then several pages later this: "The covenant is not a document, it is a practice, it is lived. The moment a generation fails to live it, the moment someone opens a door after dark without the ash, the moment someone speaks loudly in the forest at night, the moment someone brings an outsider into the boundary without preparation, the covenant does not break. It simply becomes unenforceable. And then what is inside the houses is no different from what is outside them." Thomas underlined this passage 3 times. He wrote in the margin, "What does preparation mean? Ask." He never found out. On the 9th day, Thomas told Billy he was leaving. He had what he needed. He had Voss's papers transcribed in full. He had 11 days of recorded observations. He had something else too, something he did not write in his notebook and did not record on the microcassette, but that is evident in the way his voice changes on the later tapes. A flatness, a new economy of words, the voice of a man who has seen something he has decided very deliberately not to describe. His last full recording before packing to leave contains this evening of the 18th. "I am going to leave tomorrow morning before full light. I have everything I came for. I am going to leave. I want to be clear about that. I am choosing to leave." Why he felt the need to state this twice is not clear. What is clear is what happened next. Billy Calloway found him loading the car. Billy had his own camera, a small consumer video unit, the kind that used full-size VHS cassettes and sat heavy and awkward on the shoulder. He had been filming around the township for weeks, his parents tolerating it with the resigned acceptance of people who have other things to worry about. He told Thomas he wanted to keep filming. He had seen something in the woods above the eastern ridge 2 nights before. He wanted evidence. Thomas should have said no. Every instinct of the trained field worker should have told him to say no. Instead, he gave Billy his microcassette recorder as a secondary audio device and told him to film whatever he found and to mail the tape to Thomas's home address if anything significant happened. He wrote the address on the inside cover of a spare field notebook and gave that to Billy as well. He drove out of Blackwood on the morning of September 20th, 1989. 14 days later, Gerald and Ruth Calloway were reported missing by a neighboring township's postal worker who had noticed that the Calloway mailbox had been overflowing for nearly 2 weeks. When West Virginia State Police arrived at the Calloway property on October 4th, they found the following: a table set for supper, food partially eaten, 1 chair overturned, a child's shoe, left foot, size 9, located 17 feet from the front porch in the direction of the eastern tree line. No blood, no signs of struggle inside the house, no bodies. The ash line across the front threshold had been disturbed, not scattered, not swept away, crossed. Something had crossed it, from the outside in. The VHS camera was found under Billy's bed, still loaded with a cassette. The microcassette recorder, Thomas's recorder with his name on the label, was found on the kitchen table beside the untouched supper dishes. The FBI arrived on October 7th. The VHS cassette recovered from Billy Calloway's camera was logged as evidence item number 17. It was reviewed in full by 2 FBI agents on October 9, 1989 in a viewing room at the Charleston field office. One of those agents, a 12-year veteran named Specialist Carroll, submitted a written request to be removed from the case the following morning. The request was granted without the standard review period, which is itself unusual. Carroll retired from the Bureau 14 months later. He has never spoken publicly about the Blackwood file. The cassette's contents were partially transcribed in a supplemental evidence report filed in 1991. That report remains classified. What follows is drawn from a summary document that was partially declassified in 2006, with significant redactions. The tape begins in daylight. Billy filming around the township, his mother hanging laundry, his father splitting wood, the ordinary textures of a day recorded with the slightly too close, slightly unsteady framing of a teenager with a heavy camera. The township looks, in daylight, almost peaceful. The tape cuts. It is now dark. The timestamp in the lower left corner of the frame reads 10:22 post-meridian. This is notable because the Calloway family, like every family in Blackwood, extinguished all lights before full dark. The fact that Billy was filming at 10:22 means he was awake in the dark with the camera running. The night vision casts everything in the green-white register of a world without warmth. Billy's camera is pointed at his bedroom window. Outside, the porch. Beyond the porch, the yard. Beyond the yard, the tree line. Nothing moves for 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Then the tree line moves. The declassified summary describes what follows in these words. The recording captures movement consistent with one or more figures at the boundary of the wooded area adjacent to the Calloway property. The figures, if figures they are, do not move in a manner consistent with known human or animal locomotion. Their proportions, as visible in the night vision register, are described by reviewing agents as, and here the text is redacted, 3 full lines blacked out, consistent with nothing in the reviewing agent's prior experience. What the summary does describe in full is the audio. At the 11-minute mark of the night sequence, a voice begins outside the house. The voice is female. It is calm. It calls Billy's name. It is his mother's voice. Summary notes in flat, bureaucratic language that somehow makes it worse. The subject's mother, Ruth Calloway, was confirmed to be inside the residence at the time of recording. The origin of the voice on the tape has not been determined. Billy does not open the door. He can be heard breathing. The breathing is fast and shallow but controlled, in the way of someone who has been trained from earliest childhood for exactly this moment. He does not speak. He does not move toward the door. He keeps the camera on the window. The voice outside calls his name 4 more times over the course of 19 minutes. Each time it is Ruth Calloway's voice, perfectly rendered, perfectly calm. Each time Billy does not move. At the 31st minute the voice stops. At the 32nd minute the front door, not Billy's bedroom door, the front door, 2 rooms away, is heard opening. The recording ends 47 seconds later. The circumstances under which the recording ends are not described in any available document. Thomas Hargrove was located at his apartment in Huntington, West Virginia on October 8, 1989. He was questioned by FBI agents for 6 hours. He was not charged. He was, by the accounts of the agents who interviewed him, cooperative, coherent, and visibly afraid, not of the agents, but of something he would not name directly. He told them about Voss. He told them about the ash lines. he told them everything he had written in the notebook and everything he had not. At the end of the interview, one of the agents asked him a direct question. The question, as recorded in the interview transcript, was, "In your professional assessment, what happened to the Calloway family?" Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "The ash line was crossed. That is what happened. Someone crossed the ash line and the covenant stopped being enforceable. I told you what Voss wrote. I told you what that means. The family understood it. They had lived with it their whole lives. They knew the terms." The agent asked, "And Billy?" "He stayed inside. He didn't open the door." Thomas looked at the table. "Billy knew the terms too," he said. "That's the worst part." Thomas Hargrove left Huntington in the spring of 1990. His forwarding address was never registered with the Postal Service. He published nothing after 1988. There are no records of him in any academic or government database after October of 1989. The entirety of Blackwood Township, all 14 structures, all remaining residents, was vacated by November of that same year. The West Virginia Department of Transportation formally closed the access road in 1990, citing structural concerns with a small bridge at the 3-mile mark. The bridge, local engineers' records show, was structurally sound. The Voss papers that Thomas transcribed have never been found. The originals, the water-damaged box Billy found in the crawlspace of the feed store, were listed in the evidence log and then listed again in a subsequent audit as missing. In 2003, a journalist attempting to locate surviving Blackwood residents found one, an elderly woman living in a retirement community outside Charleston. She had been 12 years old when her family left the township. She agreed to a recorded conversation on the condition that the recording was never broadcast. The journalist honoring that condition published only a written summary. The woman said that she still laid ash across her threshold every morning, that she had done it every morning of her adult life wherever she lived, that her children thought it was an old family habit like a superstition, and she had never corrected them. The journalist asked if she believed the covenant still applied now that she was so far from the township. The woman was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The covenant doesn't belong to a place." Reverend Voss was very clear about that. He wrote it down. "Once you have been inside the boundary, once they have seen you, the covenant follows you." She looked at the threshold of her apartment door, the thin gray line of ash, fresh that morning. "I have not missed a single day," she said. "In 51 years I have not missed a single day." She did not say what she was afraid would happen if she did. She did not need to. The Blackwood Township case file, evidence log number 4471-B, was last reviewed by an active FBI agent in 19. The reviewing agent's notes consist of a single line, "Recommend permanent classification, do not reopen." The recommendation was followed. Blackwood does not appear on any map printed after 19. The ash lines are still there. Someone keeps refreshing them.